Boundaries are about you, your values, what matters to you, and how you want to operate in the world. It's not about anybody else. You don't set your boundaries from a place of fear or a place of power and control. You set them for self-care and self-respect, and you set them that are aligned with your values.
We learn, we grow, we expand the horizon or the lines of our safe zone, and being able to communicate that starts with being able to understand it yourself.
Welcome back to Unapologetic Rabble-Rousers. I'm DocShellie.
And I'm Carla. We're starting a whole new segment, and this one is going to be all about boundaries.
Boundaries.
Very, very interesting topic, and one that we probably encounter, if not in every conversation, certainly every day. Because it's all about understanding what they are, the value of them, how we manage them, what happens if we don't.
Exactly.
So let's talk about it.
All right.
Why don't we start by defining that? What is a boundary?
So when I think about boundaries, I think about sports games. I'm a tennis player, and I've recently taken up pickleball. You have every sports game has lines, has boundaries. You're in, you're out. You got the three-point line in basketball. You got the bases you have to run in baseball. You've got your foul ball area, right? So every sports game has boundaries. Mm-hmm. And what is the intent of that? To keep you safe, to know the rules, to keep everybody in fair play. So in our personal and professional lives, boundaries are just as important to keep ourselves safe, to be respectful of ourselves, and to let other people know these are the things I'm willing to do and I'm not willing to do.
I love the sports analogy. It is so true. And in some of them, hockey, for instance, don't just have lines. You get physical structures.
Yes.
that you can bounce off of or whatever. But
yeah,
being able to maintain that field of play, that's really, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and that's really what it's like when you think about our own boundaries, right? If I want to be in relationship with anybody, whether it's in the workplace or it's in my personal life, we should know how to operate with each other.
And that means understanding and respecting.
Yeah. It's pretty simple, really. But people freak out when they hear boundaries. They're like, oh, no. Those are horrible things.
What feeds that? What is it that makes a boundary sound like such an awful thing?
I think I have zero scientific proof of this, but I think it's because people will violate their own boundaries. And if you're willing to violate your own boundary, then how dare you get upset at somebody else for violating that boundary? So it causes some internal strife.
Okay, so if I put the limits on, I have to be responsible.
Whoa, that's scary. Yeah, exactly. And I want to be really clear here. Boundaries are about yourself. You are setting boundaries for you. You are not setting them for other people. You are not setting them with other people in mind. Boundaries are about you, your values, what matters to you, and how you want to operate in the world. It's not about anybody else.
It's self-care. It's keeping yourself safe.
Yeah.
But it means understanding where's your safe zone.
Exactly. And I think it's important to distinguish, too, there's spoken and unspoken boundaries. I'll give you an example of an unspoken boundary, because whenever I say that, people are like, unspoken boundary? What? If I go out on a date with a guy, I do not have him pick me up at my home unless I happen to know him really, really well, which in most cases I do not know him really, really well yet. So I will text a friend. This is the person's name who I'm going out with, and this is where I'm going. And I will meet him there. You ain't coming to my house and picking me up.
Okay.
I don't want you to know where I live just yet. I don't know you. I don't know if I can trust you. You might be a serial killer, because we know I've dated some weirdos.
More on that in a future episode.
That'll be an outtake somewhere. But another unspoken boundary might be, I don't particularly like to be around people who smoke, but I'm not going to make a big deal about it. There's no smoking in my home, full stop. That's a boundary. But I may choose to leave a situation where there's a lot of people smoking, or I might choose to stay. It just depends on the situation. But if I make that a stated boundary and then I violate that boundary, then that opens it up for other people to go, oh, well, her boundaries clearly are not important to her. And boundaries can flux as we grow and we develop and we learn and we age. Our life shifts, and so too will our boundaries. So what maybe was an appropriate boundary when I was 10, at 55, is maybe not an appropriate boundary anymore.
Well, understanding that boundaries can change, that gets down to gets into this topic about the spoken and unspoken boundaries, because not only can they change, but we can't hold people accountable for boundaries that we have not communicated.
Exactly.
So another part of the responsibility is, first, I need to know me well enough to be able to draw a box around my safe zone, for whatever the situation might be. I can't expect people to honor that if they don't know about it.
Right. And you also have to understand, what are the consequences if somebody does violate that boundary? It's not an ultimatum, but what are the consequences of that?
So when you say it's not an ultimatum,
I think ultimatums come from a place of wanting to have power and control over somebody. They come from a place of fear. You don't set your boundaries from a place of fear or a place of power and control. You set them for self-care and self-respect, and you set them that are in line with your values. So you can have consequences for people who don't follow your stated boundaries. But when you make an ultimatum, if you violate this, then I'm never going to talk to you again. That's an ultimatum.
Okay. Okay. So when we get into those relationships where there is that power struggle, so setting boundaries and issuing ultimatums, while they may sound like it's a thing about setting the boundary, it really isn't.
No, ultimatums are not at all, and do not belong in a healthy relationship at all, ever.
So back to the
I dated a guy one time that gave me an ultimatum. Guess what I did? Peace out, dude. I don't play that game.
Shellie out.
Yeah, I'm out. I don't do well with ultimatums. We can have a conversation, and we can have a conversation, and we can talk about what happens if this or if that, but you don't get to give me an ultimatum. I don't respond well.
We see it happen a lot.
Mm-hmm.
In relationships, we see it happen a lot.
Absolutely.
I mean, we can talk about it from a parental point of view. You know, if you don't clean your room, I'm going to take away something. I have to share.
And that's to instill fear.
Yes.
Do this, or I'm going to take away the 25 things that you love.
So I want to share a quick story about that. When I was 10, something about being 10. When I was 10, I had occasion to be told by my mother that I needed to clean my room. I wanted to go out and play. So I was given the opportunity to clean my room in order to be able to go out and play. And I got upset. Now, I happen to have been a collector of baseball cards and football trading cards.
That's right.
And I had complete sets. American League, National League. From a baseball point of view, I had rookie cards from rookies that were back in the early 60s. Okay. And you know what? I was going to show Mom. So I threw away the entire collection of baseball and football cards.
You rabble-rouser, you.
I am. Yeah, I would also be a bazillionaire right now if I hadn't decided that, well, I'll show you.
I'll show her.
And I have to tell you, right up to the time when she passed, we joke about the fact that, do you think maybe if we looked in this part of the basement, maybe we'd find the baseball cards that you made me throw away? It was kind of an ongoing thing, but, you know.
So you don't respond well to ultimatums either.
No, I guess not. I guess not. So I think we may chew more on this notion about the ultimatum and the power struggle that it reflects. In this case, as we're just introducing this notion of boundaries, and there's really some good stuff that we're going to be talking about as we go further into it. One of the things that we chewed on was the notion about how having boundaries well established, you know you well enough that you can know what lines can and cannot be crossed. It helps foster healthier relationships.
Absolutely.
It's not about pushing people out. It's about being able to maintain and respect your safe zone. This is what works for me. This is what doesn't work for me, which can also help avoid being exploited and harmed in some way. If people don't know the boundary and they approach it, maybe step over it, it's about what do you do? What do you do when that pressure comes? And you need to be aware enough about how important that particular line is that you've drawn in the sand, so to speak, which always conjures up an image of a fight. So I may need to change my mental model on that. You draw that line in the sand.
Draw that line.
Yeah.
Sounds like an ultimatum.
It does. But you need to know what keeps you safe.
Absolutely.
And as you mentioned earlier, we learn, we grow, we expand the horizon or the lines of our safe zone, and being able to communicate that starts with being able to understand it yourself.
Yeah, it's about being able to have your relationships and live your life in a way like people will show up in your world, and it's up to you how you respond to them. And so we all have boundaries. We all have values. Some of them are stated, some of them are known, some of them are just our personal thing. But how we respond to other people really matters, and it'll show up when somebody crosses a boundary and how you handle it. So it's important as you think about the boundaries that you're going to set or that you have set, that you already have, if and when somebody violates that boundary, including yourself, how are you going to handle it? What's the conversation you're going to have? How are you going to lean into that conversation? What are you going to do? Are you going to do anything? Or are you just going to be that quote-unquote nice person that sits back and goes, that's what they always do. That person always violates that boundary. But it's okay. No, it's not. You have a boundary for a reason, and it is not okay when people know your boundaries and they continue to violate them.
It's interesting. Think about when does letting my boundary be infiltrated, how is that more comfortable than standing up for what I know is my line in that sand? So just yielding because of the position of the person, the relationship with the person, the circumstances in which this violation might be taking place. It's like,
yeah, and it can be very uncomfortable to hold other people accountable. Those conversations can be uncomfortable for some people. I typically don't have a problem with it, but that is years of working on it. That's a skill I have developed over the course of my life. But for some people, it's really uncomfortable, and it doesn't feel natural. And I think about the long-term impact of not holding somebody accountable to violating a boundary. They will continue to do it, so you're going to continue to feel uncomfortable for how many days, months, years, versus they have violated that conversation, that boundary. Let me be uncomfortable for a few more minutes and handle it, or be uncomfortable for the rest of your life.
Because going back to what we've talked about before, you establish a pattern. It's almost an invitation. If somebody violates that boundary and you choose to not stand up for it, taking care of yourself, you establish a pattern, which leads to expectations that not only you have of that other person, that they're going to continue to do that, but that person understands that the pattern, that's your pattern, and it's okay. So that person can continue to encroach and know full well that you're not going to say anything until you can't not say anything. And you had that with your friend, the one that asked you to stop calling her gal.
Yes.
It got to a point that said, hey, and whoa, it ends up being possibly an explosive situation that's so totally out of the norm.
Yeah, and it wasn't calling her. It was just using the word in general. It got very explosive. But yeah, and had she shared that with me the first time she heard me use the word gal, I would have stopped. And here's the other thing with boundaries. If I know you have a boundary, if I respect you, I will do my darndest to adhere to that boundary. But if you have a boundary that conflicts with my moral values, then I may not be able to abide by your boundary. And then it's up to you to manage that. What are you going to do? Are you going to remove yourself from the relationship? Are you going to remove yourself from the situation? We have to remember that boundaries are about us and our self-care. And people do not have to abide by our boundaries, but we have to know what we're going to do when they don't.
Who are you going to be? Who are you going to be, and who are you going to respect when that occurs?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a great question, is who do you want to be and how do you want to show up when people violate the boundaries that you have? The spoken, known boundaries that you have.
And what are going to be the triggers for you to consider? What are the unspoken boundaries that you're seeing violated and not doing anything about? What's up with that?
What's up with that? All right. I think we'll cover some more about boundaries in our next episode. So for today, we'll call this done. Thank you for listening. And I am DocShellie.
And I'm Carla Lewis, by the way. We'll see you next time.
We have to remember that boundaries are about us and our self-care. And people do not have to abide by our boundaries, but we have to know what we're going to do when they don't.